All right, good morning, everyone, and I guess I should say good afternoon. Welcome to Gamcast Live, the week in review for July 22nd, 2023. As I said last week, I'm going to start doing these on the weekend review. So if you're listening to this and you're expecting a podcast about Saturday's events or Sunday's events, this is not what this is. We still haven't decided whether or not we're going to do, now that we're back Saturday and Sunday, we might. But anyway, this is the weekend review. I'm going to go over the biggest stories of the week by the end of this podcast, which I hope will be less than 40 minutes. I don't have a ton of stuff, but I want to make sure you know about all the big stories and get the real news from all those big stories. So, and we're going to go in reverse chronological order. So I'm going to start, and I may have done it backwards last week, but that's fine. I'm going to start with Monday and work our way. So at the end, you're going to have the most recent, which would have been yesterday's news. So the week started. This week started with the RFK hoax. A lot of hoaxes this news. I think there are 3 or 4 hoaxes, and literally, I said this during the week during the podcast, but almost all of our news, we're to the point now where 99% of it, and by this I don't mean on the right or the conservative or whatever you want to call it. I mean the left, the alphabet networks, the mainstream media, the MSNBCs, the CNNs. It's all 100%, almost 100% hoax. And it started with the hoax that RFK Jr. made anti-Semitic remarks. They're still claiming that to this day, but it all started on Monday. That was one of the big stories, and we covered it. I'm going to do as I always do. We're going to go to the source, and the source is going to be left-wing, or at least a neutral source. This is literally a neutral source because this is literally the bite they are talking about. I apologize for the audio. It's not my fault. It's the best audio I can find, but here he is. This is about a third into the way. It's about a 2-minute bit. And this is where he's talking about bioweapons. And he's against bioweapons. He doesn't like vaccines. He doesn't like bioweapons, right? And that's what he's talking about. And then he's going to say, in fact, and he's going to start on about COVID. And about 15 seconds in, you're going to hear what they claim is anti-Semitic. It isn't. Anyway, here he goes. He's talking about bioweapons, and he transitions here.
In fact, COVID-19, there's an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain races disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are because of the structure of the genetic structure, genetic differentials among different races of the receptors of the ACE2 receptor. COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese.
There you go, right there. The people that are most immune. So it's designed according to him, and he's referring to a study, but whatever. He's referring to studies says it's designed to attack blacks and Caucasians, and the people that are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews. I'm not even sure what. I still don't know. I've been covering this story for a week now. I still don't know what sect of Judaism this is. But it doesn't really matter. You don't need to know. And ethnic Chinese. It's not anti-Semitic. He's reporting what a study found. That cannot in any way, shape, form, or fashion be anti-Semitic, especially when you know the context that's in. But the media is still running with this, and you'll see a little bit later in the show. This would be the basis for them. This is lather, rinse, repeat for them. They do this every week. They've got a bunch of hoax going on this week. And again, I've said it before, the Democrat Party and the Democrat media, the leftist media establishment, and it's all the same now. The Democrat Party has always been left of center, but this group of people used to be a small group. I mean, the communist, socialist, fascist, they were always a big part of the Democrat Party. Okay, and don't believe me, go back to back during the FDR days when people would try to, they would want to expel communists from the party, and it would never go anywhere. By the way, another big part of the Democrat coalition back then was the KKK, but I digress. And you tried to expel them from the party, and people wouldn't have it. Now, the difference between now and then is that while they were a small subset, right, they now run the party. And so what's been kicked out. At first, they kicked out all the quote-unquote conservative Democrats, and there were some. I don't want to get into it, but there were some. Then they kicked out the sort of moderate Democrats, and then now if you're a Democrat and you're pro-life, by the way, you're gone. I think there's one left. And so they've steadily gotten rid of all those, and now the only ones that are left are pretty much these, these left status, and that's what they are. But anyway. So what they've done is, and I've said this before, they're trying to build, and I think they've about completed it. I don't think there's anything left to do at this point. But what they want to do is they want to create an environment, a media environment, an information environment, whatever you want to call it, where they get to manufacture reality on a daily basis. I mean, think about it. 30 to 40% of our news today deals with quote-unquote race. Why do you think that is? Do you see racial problems in this country? I'm not saying there aren't some. I mean, of course there's some. 330 million people, you're going to have some issues. But by and large, it is not anywhere on the top 20 of anything that we actually face as a country, right? We all know this. Yet, if you were to look at the news, you would assume that we'd be living in the 1960s, right? And there'd be lynchings, and there'd be people being told they couldn't vote unless they could guess how many gumballs are in a jar. That's not happening, right? But they want to create that so they get people to vote. Similarly, they've created the climate hoax. They've created the hoax. And I don't want to get into climate because I know friends of mine that still believe that. But let's take it away from that. Let's go. Do you think that this next election and the election after that and the election after that is about whether or not the democracy is going to end? Do you think if you vote Republican, if you're in a state right now and you're listening to me, if you're in New Jersey, if you're in Tennessee, right, if you're in Atlanta, Georgia, and a lot of you are, I mean, you're literally not in New Jersey, of course, but in Tennessee and in Florida and in Georgia and a lot of the states where people are listening, you're being run by Republicans. Is democracy still going on there? Right? Of course it is. But they've got people convinced. I mean, a lot of people misunderstand the midterms. They think midterms are lost because of Dobbs. It's not true. You go back and you look. All of the uniformity of the data is clear. The Republicans lost to 20. Well, they didn't lose it. I mean, technically, they actually took the House barely. But the reason they didn't win and get a 35-plus seat majority in the House, and the reason they failed to take the Senate, right, was literally the biggest issue for the independent voter, which swung it, was you got it. The Republicans will be the end of democracy. They buy it, and that's why they continue to do this. And we're not going to get any better. Nothing's going to get better until we get people that can push back on this. So anyway, but that started the week. The next biggest story of the week, another hoax. Again, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. And this is under the line of the end of democracy. So I was at the gym Tuesday when this broke, and I started seeing up there because of the gym. There's MSNBC, CNN. There's one little Fox, which I don't watch Fox either, but to me the disparity is sort of alarming. But to be fair, I am in a blue city, and I'm in a blue area of a blue city, so that's what you're going to get. But anyway, I remember thinking, what in the world? But the headline was, and what you heard this past week was, if Trump's elected, he's gonna institute a sweeping expansion of presidential power. And here we go, the New York Crimes again. We go to the left for their own sources. Donald Trump and his allies are planning a sweeping expansion of presidential power if voters return him to office. Woo, democracy is going to go away. Sweeping expansion of presidential powers. This was a hoax from the beginning to the end. And folks, this is what's so alarming about where we're going. And I've seen this from the very beginning. And so I don't know that it made the cut. In fact, I know it didn't make the cut for one of the biggest stories of the week. But one of the hearings we had this week was about IRS whistleblowers. Yeah, that made the cut. You're going to hear about that. But this particular bit of that particular cut didn't make it. And this was Chantel Brown asking these whistleblowers who were there to talk about Hunter Biden about racial disparities in audits. Now, if you believe there are racial disparities in audits in this country, I got some bridges and some oceanfront property in places that are in the desert that we can sell you. But anyway, she ran that up the flagpole. But the more important part of that bit wasn't that she, instead of talking about Hunter, wanted to talk about race. Like I said, 30 to 40%, they got to manufacture it. Not only the fact that she lied and she made up some statistics, right? Not just that. Not just that she asked and answered her own question. All three of those things I talked about. If you want to hear the daily podcast, you can get them anywhere you get podcasts and go to that. The bigger point of that is they've been trying this for a long time and they finally succeeded in doing it. And that is this. Anytime there's a racial disparity, discrimination, and that proves racism. It doesn't. Folks, you learn this in basic law school. You learn this in basic logic. Correlation does not equal causation, right? Right? If I have a cough, right? That doesn't mean I have tuberculosis. It just doesn't. It could be, but it's a lot of other things it could be. Just because there's a racial disparity doesn't mean racism. I'll give you a good example. There's a racial disparity in the NFL, and there's a racial disparity in the NBA, and you know which way they go. Is that because of racism? It could be. It absolutely could be. But I don't think it is. I think it's just there's no racism there. It's just they're better at it. Fine. Same thing here. But the left has been trying this, and they are basically to this point now. You don't believe me? I wasn't doing a podcast at that time because I had my respite, but had I covered the last 3 decisions of the Supreme Court, that's exactly what the dissents of Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sotomayor argued in the 2 cases they wrote the main dissents for. Basically, there it is. It happens, and there's a correlation, therefore it's because of that. And this is not a good way to think. But coming back to all of this, here's how this shouldn't work at all on a remotely educated society. Right, here we go. Let's read the headline again. How Donald Trump and his allies want to expand presidential power if he's reelected. Bring independent agencies. Okay, there are independent agencies, supposedly, like the FCC and the Federal Trade Commission under direct presidential control. That is what's known, folks, as a lie. Okay, that's an outright lie. That's not misleading you. That is an outright lie. Okay, there's no such thing as an independent agency, right, in the executive branch. And part of what this hoax is designed to do is, one, scare you so you don't vote Republican, because this makes you think, oh my God, well, I mean, I like Trump or DeSantis. It doesn't matter who it is, Vivek Ramaswamy or whatever. It isn't going to matter, right? They're going to say this. And it's also to get you this whole idea. This is something they're doing subtly to you, right? They're gaslighting you a little bit at a time, and hopefully they're going to drive you crazy. But they don't like the Constitution. Now, they can't say that. The last person who said that was Jimmy Carter. And folks, I've been following politics since Jimmy Carter. Yes, I have. No, I would have been a very young person when I started, but it was always been something that interests me. Jimmy Carter was one of the few persons to ever come out and outwardly just say, like, and he basically was like, the Constitution, it's too awkward. You can't get anything done unless there's an emergency. I mean, he literally said the quiet part out loud. Part of the reason he lost. But anyway, the Democrats now, they hate the Constitution because the Constitution is a limit on federal power, right? If you remember Barack Obama running back in 2008, he would repeat the line that he didn't make this up, but he learned this from his leftist buddies, where he was taught that it's a charter of negative liberties. It's a charter of negative liberties. It doesn't tell you what you can do. It tells you a whole bunch of things you can't do. They detest the Constitution. Now, if they came right out and said the Constitution's bad, you would recoil. So what they're doing is they're just slowly beating the drum. And if you look and you know where to look, and if you listen to this podcast, you can see it everywhere. Attacks on the Supreme Court, a co-equal branch of government, that is all to, one, attack a branch that they don't like because they only partially control it. And I meant what I said. I didn't slip. That's true. They do partially control the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is left wing. I don't have time to get into it today, maybe later. But anyway, it is. Trust me. I'll accept an argument. You could make an argument at center right. I think you'd be wrong, but you could make it. The idea that the Supreme Court is quote unquote conservative is a laughingstock to anybody who knows anything about the Constitution. And I do. Anyway, I digress. It's a partially attack on a branch they only partially control, and occasionally does some things that it doesn't like, and it's a check on its powers. That's the main reason. Second reason, though, and this is also a huge benefit to them, they want you, this whole idea of separation of powers and co-equal branches, no. They don't like that at all. So that's partially what it's designed to do. Same thing here. The idea that you elect the chief executive, and then you elect this chief executive, and he comes in and he's going to reform the entire executive branch. Yeah, that's exactly what it says in the Constitution. That's exactly what the founders intended to be. If we start going down the wrong track with the executive branch or the legislative branch or the judicial branch, we need that check and balance in the executive. And this is the only time we get to elect one person to do that. That's exactly what it's intended. Oh, no. Now, they don't come out and say that, right? They say, oh, well, Donald Trump is going to expand presidential power and independent agencies. There's no such thing as an independent agency. Go read the Constitution, front, back, forward, every which way. You will not find that anywhere in there. Now, they've tried to make somehow, for example, you get appointed to the FCC, and then you have to get confirmed by the Senate and this and that, right? But the presidential can absolutely fire everybody on the FCC and go through the process and rebuild them again, right? Anyway, blah, 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 blah. There's a bunch of other stuff in here. Don't fall for it. It's a complete hoax. And it's obvious to anybody that it's a hoax. And again, this is the funny thing. I'm going to leave this and move on to the next story, which is the January 6th coming indictment for Trump. Number 3 hoax of the week, folks. And we're going to break that down, spend a lot of time with that actually. But I want you to understand, they can't stand the idea that the deep state should be pushed back against. That's exactly what they want. And folks, they don't even really try to hide it anymore. Go, and I know it may be difficult. I do it just because I like to know what the other side's thinking. But go follow some people from MSNBC. Go watch CNN. Watch the experts that they come up. They think they should be the ones telling you what to do. So by way of example, if they want us to be in Ukraine causing a war against Russia, the last thing they want is some person that's elected by you rubes to come in and stop that. And it's just that simple. Anyway, so that's the hoax there. All right, folks, here, if you're watching it on the live stream, and right now we're live streaming on Twitter and YouTube. We will post this later to Rumble. If you're listening on Rumble, please give us the likes there. We need that. And if you're listening on YouTube or Rumble, please subscribe. Now, this is an article from our Substack page, GreatAmericanMail.substack.com, GreatAmericanMail.substack.com. Remember, mail is spelled M-A-I-L, not M-A-L-E. Anyway, this is our article from April 30th, 2022. Yes, April 30th, 2022. In fact, we wrote about the January 6th hoax as early as December, I believe, of 2021. Okay, folks? Now, I want you to understand, January 6th happened January 6th, 2021, obviously. Now, everything that I'm about to talk about and what this week broke midweek on Wednesday, that Jack Smith was going to indict Donald Trump for breaking the law with respect to what he did on January 6th, everybody's known about it for 2.5 years. How and why are we just now getting around to a crime? Answer, it's a hoax. What they're doing, and what everybody that's prosecuting Trump right now, and you've got 2, this will be number 3 probably, unless Fannie can get in there and beat him, we'll see. And there's talk in Arizona that they're going to do it as well. But this is all a hoax, okay? This is all designed to get Trump to raise money and interfere with the election. Now, how are they getting there? Okay, it's very simple, folks. It's called a show trial, right? And a show trial basically is you come in and you read the wording on the page says something, but you basically ignore it, and you get the powers to be to go through the motions. That's essentially what it is, right? And so I use this example a lot, and it's the best one I can give you. If you were charged with, say, assault and battery, okay, and then you go down to the court, and the court says, how do you plead? And you say, well, I plead not guilty. You're obstructing this proceeding. Wait a minute, but he asked me how I pled. And it says right here that the person shall either plead guilty or not guilty. Those are the 2 choices. I did exactly what it says on the page. But you're obstructing it. Well, how am I obstructing? Because you're obstructing it, right? But it said, and I know it's just that it sounds like it ought to be more complicated, but it isn't. So because they say it's a crime, it is a crime. Now, what in the past has kept us from doing that? Honestly, folks, just people not doing what they're doing. People going, no, that what it obviously means to obstruct is not to plead guilty or not guilty, right? But to, try to capture the judge before you can get there and you can make the plea. To try and bribe the prosecutor, right? So he or she drops the charges to give you a sweetheart deal. That's obstruction, right? Some overt act with the intention to stop the thing from going forward. That's the way it's always been. And the reason people obeyed it is we had respect for the rule of law, and there would be pushback if you did it. Unfortunately, what you're seeing with these Trump indictments, first it was Bragg, then it was the document hoax, and now it's this. And folks, I said this during the podcast during the week, and I'll say it again. I don't know how many there are going to be. There could be 12 to 13, and I'm not exaggerating. He did this in 7 states, right? So you got 1 with the feds plus 7 states, that's 8. Now, the ones that are controlled by Republicans won't do it, so Georgia won't do it, but all the ones that are controlled by Democrats will. So, I mean, that's, 5, 6 right there, plus Bragg 7, plus the feds is 8. And trust me, everything they can do, they're going to come down on. Because once you don't have the rule of law, and once you see the public isn't going to push back, or at least so far they haven't, then there's no reason not to do it. Let's break down what they're claiming. So there's 2 things they're claiming. They added a third since I did the broadcast, and since I'm doing a weekend review, I'm not going to cover that third one. It's garbage. Essentially the same principles apply. So here's how they got to January 6th. First, January 6th happened, and you have to back up and understand what January 6th was really about. It was not about a rally. It was not about a rally that got out of control. It was not about a false flag operation. It was not about feds infiltrating it. What January 6th was about the certification of Biden's election. You are not the president of the United States of America. You're not until you are certified the president on January 6th. Why is that the case? Because it's in the Constitution, right? The constitutional materials that talk about how you elect a president that were modified by the 12th Amendment. What is the 12th Amendment? The 12th Amendment changed the way in which we voted for president. And essentially now you vote for president and vice president. And that was set up all because of the election of 1800, which resulted in a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. I digress. So on January 6th, what happens is the Electoral College votes are opened and they are counted. Now, over time, there have been problems with that, and the Constitution provides that when that happens, when you come in and you open up those electoral votes, if something happens, according to the Constitution, if you don't get it done by the 20th, when the next person is supposed to take office, then understand this, folks. This is basic constitutional law here, but this is the way it works. If for whatever reason the Electoral College doesn't get its job done, the House, and the Constitution provides this. This is what's called democracy. This is what's called the rule of law. This is how it works. Then the House gets to elect the president. One state, one vote. So you can imagine whoever controls the most states wins the presidency. I can tell you, right now it's Republicans. It was Republicans then. It's always Republicans because Democrats run up big margins in states like New York and California and New Jersey. So the rest of the states, the other 47, they pretty much lose, okay? So you're going to have an election of a president. Now you have to understand a little bit further about January 6th, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to walk you through the basics of the law, looking at this article, which honestly, it is a good article in there. I've written about 5 or 6 of them up there, but this is probably the best one in terms of the data it gives you and the breakdown of what happened. So you have to go back. How many times has the House elected the president? About 3 or 4. But the ones that were the key to this issue happened after the Civil War, and you can imagine why. So after the Civil War, the southern states are coming back into the Union, but they're still got federal troops in there, and they're only being let in slowly, and they got Republican governors. Folks, you got to understand, back when the South was FDR in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they didn't really turn Republican until the late 90s and the 2000s, okay? It had always been Democrat. But you'll notice when you started to have Republicans break in, North Carolina's an exception, but all the other states, they have never had Republicans truly as governor. But when they started to elect these Republicans, you'd be like, the first Republican since. Guess what it was the first Republican since after the Civil War. You know why? Because they were installed by the Republican Party. That's why. They weren't really elected, quote unquote, because the only people that could vote were Republicans. And of course they voted for Republican. Anyway, I digress. So as that waned on, right, and more people, they lifted the restrictions for Democrats to vote in the South. By the time you get to 1876, you have a very contentious election between Tilden and Hayes. Hayes, the Republican, would later become the president, but he would only become the president after losing the popular vote. Sound familiar? Right? He lost the popular vote, and 3 states sent dual electors to the Electoral College. As a result, the Electoral College could not determine who had won the presidency, so it went to the House. The House then eventually came up with a commission. The commission eventually selected Hayes because Hayes said, if you'll go for me, I'll pull all the troops out of the South, and the South can start voting however it wants. And of course, it's going to vote Democrat, and it's going to implement Jim Crow and harass black people. But I digress. The point of that is, after that, the Electoral Count Act of 1877 set up a whole new procedure about how the Electoral College meets on January 6th. And among other things, it provided for an objection procedure. All right. Now we're where we need to be. We need to come back up to January 6, 2021. It was that procedure that Donald Trump was attempting to use to prevent Biden from being certified. All right. And if he's not certified, he kicks the election to the House. Number 2, he was hoping that Pence would do something to somehow help him win in the Electoral College. How would that happen? Well, if there's 2 electors from 7 states, and Pence says, well, I hereby think that the Republicans are right, then he could theoretically get to the necessary 270. The third thing he was trying to do, and this is all in the article, folks, the third thing he was trying to do was at a minimum have the Electoral College that normally opens and counts the ballots within hours for it to take days and get news coverage. Of course, we didn't know then that what we know now is that the media now is not even trying to be objective, and they will completely ignore things, and they will not even cover real news. Part of the reason why they no longer will even cover real news, and when you like, oh, we're not going to go to Donald Trump because he lies. We can't go to live to Ron DeSantis because we can't fact check him in real time, as if that's your duty or your job, right? The reason we decide what's news. We decide what to cover, not facts on the ground. Anyway, I come back. What Trump had done, he had come up with alternate electors from 7 states. He was going to send them there. They were going to have the objections. Now, one more thing you need to know about January 6th. You can't just stand up and object. That's not the way it works. You have to have an objection. It has to be in writing. It has to be vouched for by 1 congressperson and 1 senator. If that's the case, then you can object. And according to the Electoral Count Act of 1877, the Senate and the House both have to go back to their chambers respectively and debate for a minimum of 2 hours. Okay, all right. All that was to happen on January 6th, all according to the Constitution and the law that I have spent the last 5 minutes spelling out to you. What happened? Well, what happened was the rally got out of control, and we don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody will ever know except the people who did it and God. Why? But at that point, they had just started the objection process for Arizona. Again, they had 6 more states to go. The Capitol's breached. They pause the Electoral College. They get the Capitol back under control within 5 or 6 years. They come back, and everybody in a state of shock says, you know what? Forget about the objections. Biden is now certified. Now, I tell you all that to tell you this. Jack Smith says that they're going to prosecute Trump for that. What he did was somehow violative of the law. How? When that's exactly what the Electoral Count Act of 1877 and the 12th Amendment provide. How are you breaking the law? Folks, go read leftist research, leftist books. I highly recommend Darkness at Noon, but you can if you want to go to the Wikipedia, you want the cheaper version, go that and look up show trial, Stalin show trial. You'll see exactly what this is. That's all it is. Now, what is the law that they came up? Here we go right now. And I'm watching the clock here, so I'm going to have to do one bit and then move on. But here's one of the crimes that Jack Smith said in his letter that he sent to Trump that is going to be a crime. The first alleged crime is obstruction of Congress proceeding to count the Electoral College votes on January 6th in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1512C2. Section 1512C2 provides, requires 3 elements to be proven for a conviction. The person obstructed, influenced, or impeded, or attempted to obstruct, influence, or impede an official proceeding of the United States and did so corruptly. Now, you speak English if you're listening to this podcast. Now, folks, literally speaking, let's read these words again and let's think about them literally, okay? The person obstructed, influenced, or impeded, or attempted to obstruct, influence, or impede an official proceeding of the United States and did so corruptly. Do you now understand how a show trial can happen? Now, obviously, if you read that, obviously counting the votes of the Electoral College was an official proceeding. So number 2 is satisfied easily. Nobody disputes that. It was. Well, actually, you could argue it wasn't an official proceeding, but let's just set that aside. I don't want to get too far in the weeds with you. All right, the person obstructed, influenced, impeded. Well, folks, how did he obstruct it? Oh, well, you obstructed it because you brought in people from other states that you knew you didn't win. Well, no, just like in 1876, I had to do that, right? How does this work? Oh, well, I'm Vice President Pence. I'm the President of the Senate on January 6, 2021. I hereby find that the 2 delegates, the Republican delegates, are the proper delegates from Pennsylvania because the governor improperly sent out ballots to everybody. Mr. Trump, where are your delegates? Oh, sir, we didn't know. We didn't know you were going to sustain the objections, so we don't have any. Well, that's not how this works. If you don't have them, then I can't give them. Well, so of course he had to send them there. But let's set that aside for a second. Let's move on from obstruct because that's a little tougher one, right? Influenced. The person obstructed, influenced, or impeded. Well, it did impede it because you did send alternate people. Heck, you impeded it by objecting, right? Objection. It says right here I can object. But you're impeding us. But let's get to the easiest one, folks. This is how this game is played. Influenced. What in the flip does that mean? Influenced? Influenced? I can influence an official proceeding of the United States with this podcast. Right now, I am officially impeding, I'm certainly influencing official proceedings in the United States somewhere if somebody's listening or somebody picks it up or takes the idea, right? Now, what do you need? Now you need number 3, corruptly. What does that mean? What's corruptly mean? Is it's in the eye of the beholder? Let God help us not, because if it is, and that's how you get there, folks. If you read the statute the way Jack Smith is apparently reading it, that's it. I can bring you in. I think you get 20 years for this statute. All right, I'll go do one more real quick. The second one is a conspiracy charge, and this is how you know it's a hoax. They oftentimes they are so far over their skis they're not even pretending that it's not corrupt. A conspiracy charge always has to tack on to the original charge. It's not a separate alone charge, okay? So if the first one falls, this is false, but he's purporting that it is a separate charge. Another way you know it's a hoax, folks. All right, so one other quick bit here. Also this week, apparently, this isn't, in the case of Jack Smith, he just said, you're a target, so he hasn't technically indicted yet. Michigan went ahead and indicted the electors that Trump set up from Michigan. Now, I highlighted this. This is from Rachel Maddow back in December of last year. I can't find the one that I used when I did a podcast about this, but this will give you a flavor of what's going on with the alternate electors, and then I'll move on to the next story. Here you go.
To meeting to describe themselves as the electors from the state of Wisconsin, even though they weren't. We subsequently learned that this group of Republicans in a state that Biden won, I
understand we're talking about Michigan and this is Wisconsin, but it's the same. All the 7 people did the same thing.
Pen to paper. They not only declared that day that they were the real electors, and they were electors for Trump, they actually drew up forged documents in which they tried to impersonate real electors. They purported to.
Now, here's why it's important to see this, folks, because this elector's hoax. Okay, what I already told you is if you're gonna object and the objection sustained, you have to have electors there. That's just the way they did it in 1876. That's the way logically way it makes any sense. Okay, so that's what they did, and Trump went to the trouble to get people to do it, and they went ahead. And again, Maddow's trying to make this. What, they did it on a lark. What a bunch of imbeciles. They pretended. Okay, yeah, I get that, Rachel, but here it was a necessary precursor to follow through with the law, the Electoral Count Act of 1877. But the bigger point here is, and if you're watching this on YouTube or Rumble or Twitter, you'll see right here, they signed it and they mailed it in. Okay, they signed it on December 14th of 2020, right? And I've already said, if you go to my article, you'll see the AP had this as early as November. Everybody knew this was happening. This is not news. Why 2.5 years later, these people being prosecuted? Because it's election interference, it's campaigning, right? It's trying to raise money, right? These people didn't do anything wrong. And if they had done anything wrong, would they literally sign their names, put their names, and mail it into Congress? For crying out loud, no. They thought what they were doing is the right thing. There's also some First Amendment implications in there. But folks, the point of this is a hoax designed to interfere in the election, raise money for Democrats, and further erode the idea of the rule of law. They want you to get used to the idea that we can make anything into a crime and we can arrest you. So by Thursday of the week, we had the whistleblowers from the IRS. We actually ended up with 2. We were told there was going to be 1. You'll recall a couple weeks ago that Hunter Biden got a sweetheart deal, no felony, no jail time, right? Anyway, here is Gary Shapley. He works with the IRS, and he's going to testify to how the investigations that ultimately ended up in the sweetheart deal, how it went down, and why the IRS, even under Trump, bent over backwards to help Hunter Biden. Take a listen.
In November of 2022, the statute of limitations was set to expire for the 2014 and 2015 charges in D.C., which included the 2014 felonies for the attempt to evade or defeat tax and fraud or false statement regarding bereavement income earned by Hunter Biden in those years. The statute of limitations had been extended through a tolling agreement with Hunter Biden's defense counsel, and they were willing to extend it past November 2022. Weiss allowed those to expire.
All right, folks, a little bit of inside baseball here, but and they talked a lot more about what's going on. Basically demonstrated that they were interfered with, that whenever they told they needed to interview people, those people were tipped off. I mean, a lot of obstruction here, but this is just one of many things that were revealed. Of course, the Democrats didn't want to talk about it. They completely ignored it. This is a sad day in America when just blatant, obvious corruption can go unpunished, and the party in power. And also, you understand, this is the legislative branch. There's no reason for them to protect the executive branch and no reason for them to protect the child of the executive branch. I mean, folks, honestly, if we were still a constitutional republic, you'd have to throw your son under the bus. And I know that's not easy. Or resign. You could resign, I suppose. You could pardon him and you and then just resign. But they're not going to do either, right? And this is how bad it's gotten. But a little bit inside baseball, what he said. What he basically said was, we're investigating Hunter. We think we've got some charges we can bring, right? Well, what happens, there's so-called statute of limitations. I believe with the IRS, it's 3 years, might be 4 years, doesn't matter. When that statute comes up, you have a choice. You can either file the claim, right? Or you can get the whoever your target is to agree to a tolling agreement. What he's saying is here, the person agreed to a tolling agreement, which is, it's supposed to expire, let's just say, hypothetically, on July the 31st. I'll toll it till July 31st of 2024. Why? Well, because you don't want the person to feel pressure to file it because the deadline's coming up, and once that's done, it can't be undone. It's a matter of public record, blah, 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 blah. Lots of reasons why you were doing it. What he says here is basically we were investigating. I'm an investigator, and the guy who's running this thing, whose job it is to either charge it or get the tolling agreement, and Biden's people were saying, yeah, we're willing to toll it again. He chose to just drop it. Okay? I mean, folks, it's hard to get much more blatant than that, assuming this guy's telling the truth. But again, folks, here's the type of thing that is able to be discovered, right? You can figure out when the statute is. You can find documents. There'll be writings back and forth whether they were willing to toll it. And we know whether he filed it. He didn't. Anyway, you would think there'd be some real media out there. So, folks, I don't know why Marjorie Taylor Greene did this, but you know what? When you live in a democracy and there's this thing called freedom of speech, you know what? You get to do things, right? As long as you stay within the white lines, you're good. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene, I wouldn't have done it this way. It's not the way I would have done it. I think it's a little bit of a cheap trick on her part. It is. And what she's talking about here, I don't know how much of it I'm going to get into, but basically her point when she's talking about the Hunter Biden is not that he got a sweetheart deal that I talked about, not that they went out of their way to let charges that could have brought drops so they could help him get a sweetheart deal. None of that. None of those things. Her point that she wanted to make was that he took deductions for hookers, and that she violated the Mann Act. Folks, it's not the Mann Act because it has to do with men taking women over state lines. It's the Mann Act because the man that made it the law, it is the law, by the way, it's illegal for you to take a woman across state lines for nefarious purposes. It's still on the books. I don't think it's enforced anymore, but it was back then. The guy who proposed it, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Mann. It's Mann, so it's the Mann Act, whatever. So she talked that basically he had violated the Mann Act. Anyway, I digress. But the point is, she wanted to make the point that he was taking deductions for hookers and violating the Mann Act. Well, she decided to... Anyway, so she decided to show these pictures of Hunter getting a Hummer. And I mean, it's blacked out. You can't really see anything, but you can tell what's... Anyway, so let's just run the tape. But anyway, take a listen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shapley, you started an investigation into Hunter Biden, codenamed Sportsman, which opened in November of 2018. It was an offshoot of an investigation the IRS was conducting into a foreign-based amateur online pornography platform. This is evidence of Hunter Biden making sex. Excuse me, this is my time. Making pornography.
Should we be displaying this, Mr. Chairman?
All right, folks, that is Jamie the Rascal Raskin jumping in. And by the way, everybody that brags about what a great lawyer he is, Jamie, she's been holding the bit up for 30 seconds. It took you about 25 seconds to get to it. A good lawyer like me would have been on it from the beginning, right? I mean, anyway. all the bragging there. Anyway, so the point of reason I tell you that story is because they tried a point of order. Is it proper? Later, people said it was unethical. None of that's the case. A lot of people said she violated various laws as it relates to Hunter Biden. A bunch of things to talk about here. First and foremost, these people have absolute immunity when they are on the floor. They have a lesser immunity, but they still have immunity when they're not on the floor and they're out by the cameras. But inside that house, they can pretty much say anything they want. Hate to break it to you folks, but they can. And there's a reason for that. It's called the First Amendment. It's called freedom. It's called government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We go into that house, we got to debate something. I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to shut me down. But Democrats don't believe in the Constitution anymore, and that's as good of an example as you can get. A little bit of an update. I saw it this morning. Hunter Biden's lawyer literally is filing an ethics complaint against, which he has no right to do, for crying out loud. What a joke this country's become. You can't file an ethics complaint. I can't, you can't, he can't, nobody can. You have to be a member of the House for flipping sake. But anyway, this is what a joke we've become. Anyway, there's nothing unethical about that. Is it potentially in bad taste? Yes. Would I have done it? No. But there's nothing unconstitutional about it. We've got to get away from this. I don't like what you did, and therefore it violates some law. Anyway, so the next hearing that would come after the Hunter Biden whistleblower, all part of the Oversight Committee, was the committee that's overseeing the censorship by the governor. And one of their witnesses would be none other than RFK Jr. We heard from him about 40 minutes ago. We're 40 minutes in. I'm going to try to keep it under an hour. We'll see. I think I can do it. Yeah, we heard from him. Remember those anti-Semitic comments that he made that you heard about 40 minutes ago? Well, here's what happened when he decided to show up at the House a few days later. Take a listen.
I'd like to raise a point of order.
Young lady, say a point of order.
Point of disorder, more like it.
Pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2, which Mr. Kennedy is violative of, I move that we move into executive session because Mr. Kennedy has repeatedly made despicable anti-Semitic and anti-Asian comments as reason.
All right, folks, there you go. I want to move into an executive session. So, government of the people, by the people, for the people. I get to see it because I need to know the information so I can help self-govern. Oh, no, you peasant. This is Debbie Wasserman Short. She used to be head of the Democrat committee or Democrat Party. I mean, she literally wants to go into executive session, all because he's made anti-Semitic comments. Okay, well, let's hear what they are because you heard them earlier. Let's see if she's got different ones. Spoiler, she doesn't.
Last week, Rule 11, Clause 2 says, whenever it is asserted by a member of the committee that the evidence or testimony at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate any person, or it is asserted by a witness that the evidence or testimony that the witness would give at a hearing may tend to defame, degrade, or incriminate the witness, and it goes on. Mr. Kennedy, among many other things, has said, I know a lot now about bioweapons. We put out hundreds of millions of dollars into ethnically targeted microbes. The Chinese have done the same thing. In fact, COVID-19, there is an argument that it is ethnically targeted. COVID-19 attacks certain...
There is an argument.
...disproportionately. The races that are most immune to COVID-19 are...
A lady making a motion or a speech?
I've made a motion to move into executive session.
So anyway, folks, this is unprecedented, and it just goes to show you how little the Democrat Party thinks of us and of its voters and of Americans generally, right? But again, this is how everything is a hoax, and so much comes out of the hoax and the hoax. So that first it was a hoax to even say he said it. Then, based on the hoax, she uses it as a way to try and pull another hoax, which is to keep you to hear from whatever testimony he's going to talk about in front of this committee. Well, it got better. So now we're up to Friday, folks. And I mean, folks, is there a bigger failure of politics in America than Vice President Kamala Harris? And she's awful. I mean, awful in so many ways. Well, yeah, it could get worse. So a little bit of a backstory. Florida was working on its AP or curriculum for, I believe it was middle school. And as part of that, they wanted to discuss how they were going to teach slavery and other subjects. This was done by a committee that was headed by black people, and they came up with their 14-point plan of what you're going to talk about in slavery. Now, first and foremost, you remember we were pretty reliably told that Florida doesn't even teach slavery anymore, right? They're banning books. You can't say gay, even though you can say gay. You can't say gay, and we don't even teach slavery. Now, apparently, they are teaching slavery. We just don't like the way that they're teaching it. So listen to Kamala explain what her this as soon as this 216-page document broke, she comes out with this. She spent your taxpayer money, my taxpayer money, all of our taxpayers' money to jump on a plane to go down to Jacksonville, Florida to complain about this because the 216-page document came out on Thursday. By Friday, she's out there telling people this. Take a listen.
Just yesterday in the state of Florida, they decided middle school students will be taught that enslaved people benefited from slavery.
All right, they benefited from slavery. Okay, well, here we go. You know it is, the Great American Mail. You know what we're going to do. We're going to go to the source. Let's figure out if that really happened. This is CBS News, one of the Alphabet networks, so you know it's left-wing. That's what we always do. Florida's new Black History curriculum says slave developed skills that could be used for personal benefit. Well, they're actually telling the truth. Good for CBS. All right. Anyway, if you scroll down, which you can do as easily as I can do, and you click right here, you will see the state's academic standards. And if you put in a search for benefit, which I did, you can see right up there in the left-hand corner, I'm highlighting it for you. Benefit, that takes you to page 6 of the 216-page document under section SS 68AA 2.3. Examine the various duties and trades performed by slaves. Example, agricultural work, painting, carpentry, tailoring, domestic service, blacksmithing, transportation. Now, again, I thought we weren't teaching about slavery. Oh, but apparently we are. Let's look at 2.2. Explain the effect of the cotton industry on the expansion of slavery due to Eli Whitney's cotton gin. Well, that sounds like slavery to me. 2.1. Explain early congressional actions regarding the institution of slavery. But I thought they weren't teaching slavery. They can't even keep their hoaxes straight. But anyway, I digress. Clarifications. Benchmark clarification for 2.3, which was explaining the various duties and trades performed by slaves. Instruction includes how slaves develop skills which, in some instances, could be applied for their personal benefit. That is an irrefutable, absolute fact. It's obviously true. If you were a slave, for example, in 1864 and you had been taught to be a blacksmith, by 1865 or 66, when the war was over, depending on what time in 1865 you are, and you were there, you could take that skill and go out there and sell it because you free. And under the 14th Amendment, we talk about the Civil War amendments all the time, 13 into slavery, 14th, the Republicans were smart enough to go, oh yeah, well, I mean, of course, I know what the Democrats, they'll do. I know what they'll do. They'll say you ain't slaves no more, but you ain't citizens. So we take care of that with the 14th Amendment. If you are a citizen, you get all the rights and privileges and immunities, and all those slaves did. What did the 15th Amendment do? They said, well, yeah, well, you got the rights and privileges, and you ain't a slave. They took care of that, but you can't vote. Oh, yeah, well, no, what 15th Amendment says, black men, not women, no women. Black men got the right to vote before women did, folks. Don't ever forget that. Very important when they're pulling off the hoax. You know the truth. Anyway, it's obviously true. But I'll leave you with this, folks, and you're now all caught up to date. You now know the stories of the past week. So I'm basically done here, but I'll leave you with this, folks. Of all the problems we have in this country, everything that we could be doing right now, your vice president thinks the most important thing to do with your tax money in her time, which I assume is valuable, I know mine is, I know yours is to get on a plane and go down to Florida and gaslight and demagogue people into believing that Florida is somehow saying that slavery benefited people. That's not what they said. Now you know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, and you now know the stories, the biggest stories of the week, at least in Great American Mail's opinion, and I don't know who else matters, for July 22nd, 2023. If you enjoyed this, and I hope you did, I hope you will tune in next Saturday.